All right. Hello, everyone. This is Louise Savela with Rails. I'm a consulting and continuing education specialist, and I'm really happy that you're all here for Kristen Remenar's webinar called C is for Common Core and Collection Development. Before I turn everything over to her, I'm just going to make a couple quick announcements. First, I want to thank Kristen for presenting this today and for giving us permission to record the webinar. Sorry about that. And we'll post that on the Rails CE archives hopefully by next week. I just want to make a couple technical announcements. Everybody in the audience is muted. So if you have a question for Kristen, go ahead and type that in your question box. I will be monitoring those and sharing them with Kristen, and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible throughout the program. If you're having audio problems, there is a sound check option in the audio section of your control panel. Your control panel might be reduced. There's a little orange arrow in the upper right corner that you can click to expand or contract that control panel, and in there you'll see the audio section. Sometimes just checking your volume or your connections helps. I know sometimes I mute my speakers and my microphone and forget to turn them back on. Also sometimes exiting out of the program and of GoToWebinar and coming back in sometimes corrects the problem as well. But if you're having any technical difficulties, please go ahead and type that into the question box as well. And then one last announcement. We are really thrilled that ISLMA, the Illinois School and Library Media Association, partnered with us to issue one professional development hour credit for this webinar. So if there are any school librarians or other people who in the audience today who are keeping up their certification, in the handout section of the control panel, there's two documents that are evaluation forms, and one is from the Illinois School Board and the other is from the Illinois School and Library Media Association. You can download those and complete those evaluations and send them back to me. There's instructions on the form, and both of those forms need to be returned to Rails within 30 days by October 15th. And again, those instructions are all on the forms. I will repeat some of this information in the chat box in just a moment after we get started. But we thank ISLMA for partnering with us in order to make those credits available to you. So without any further ado, I am going to switch things over to Kristen. Let me change her to be the presenter. All right, Kristen, hello. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Louise. I really appreciate it.
All right.
All right, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Common Core standards and how those standards affect our collection development making decisions, as well as some of the activities we can do in our library and storytime classes in order to really help build those literacy skills. I'm Kristen Remenar. The picture that you see that is not Cookie Monster, that's a picture my husband did of me. I'm sure many of you can relate to that feeling of having a lot of things going on at once. So today, here's our agenda. We're going to go over the Common Core standards for reading and writing. And for many of you school librarians, this is going to be a review. But if you're a public librarian, this might be new information. What I want to make sure we do is to be able to define these standards in parent-friendly terms. So when we've got grown-ups that we're talking to, usually parents or sometimes school board members, rather than we can put those literacy skills in terms that are easily understandable. Once we've gone over the standards, then I want to get into the practical stuff. So once we know what the standards are, okay, what do we do to teach and support them? So I want to share at least 2 books for every standard, one for early elementary and one for the older kids, that you can use and then think about too, I want to buy more books like this, or maybe you'll think about some books you already have in your collection using them in a different way. I also want to talk briefly too about activities you can actually do to extend these books, because we would love to be able to read to our kiddos all the time, but we know that in order for literacy skills to really develop, we're going to need to do more than just read. So here's some activities that I've done that help build literacy skills. So if you're wondering who you're listening to for the next hour, hi, I'm Kristen Remenar. I'm a public librarian in the youth services area, and I have been for 13 years now. Before I was a librarian, I was a teacher, so I've taught everything from preschool through 6th grade. So I have my degree as an elementary educator. I have my master's in teaching reading and language arts to be a reading specialist, and then I have my master's in library science. So when I pick up picture books, my first thought is to think of how would I use this book to help a kid learn how to read. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm a member of the Michigan Library Association, so that photo you see, that's me giving Cynthia Lord the Mitten Award for Rules. So I'm very active in my state library association as well as the American Library Association. And I'm also a brand new author. My first Charles Bridge Publishing. And I'm very fortunate that the illustrator they chose to illustrate the book is not only an award-winning illustrator of 39 books, he is also my husband. On December 29th, I have a very different book coming out called Draw with Vengeance that you see there, and it's a humorous adult book. And I published it under the name Helen Rath because I didn't want people to say, oh, that nice Miss Kristen from the library, she's got 2 books out. Oh my goodness. So Groundhog's Dilemma is the one that all of my library buddies will know about, and Helen Rath is one more for a slightly more sophisticated crowd. So let's get into the crunchy, heavy-duty information part, and then we'll get into the practical hands-on how do you use it part. Phew. Common Core state standards. They are state-led, meaning that this wasn't a national decision that every state has to do this. States voluntarily adopted a set of standards for English language arts and for mathematics. So not science, not social studies, just English and math. You guys in Illinois, you adopted this in 2010, and it's been adopted by most of our nation, which really affects the publishers especially. I don't know how many of you get catalogs from publishers that say things like, you know, our books support Common Core standards. Well, actually, any book supports Common Core standards as long as you use it in certain ways. So the big push over the past 5 years for Common Core and for state standards, it's mostly affected the publishers' stuff that's coming out, but it's also affected report cards and things like that. This is not a curriculum in that they tell you what we want our students to achieve, but not the materials we have to use in order to help them achieve it. So the standards state goals we want for our kiddos when it comes to reading, but they don't say you need to read Brown Bear in order to get them to learn how to read, which is great for us librarians because we can help our teachers and our parents find the very best materials in order to help their kids learn. Okay, so I'm not going to go over these in depth right now. I'm going to talk about these in depth later, but these are the basic skills we're talking about today. Reading foundational skills. These are just for kindergarten through 5th grade, and they're basically the skills our kiddos need to learn how to read. So the first and second one actually are for kindergarten and 1st graders only. So that's print concepts, which is basically how does print work. You know, the squiggles on the page mean something, that we read from top to bottom and left to right in English. Phonological awareness talks a lot about being able to hear the sounds in the words, a beginning sound and ending sound, things like that. Phonics and word recognition and fluency are taught kindergarten through 5th grade. And now, since I have my degree as a reading specialist, my tendency sometimes is to start talking about blends and diphthongs and get things all squished together, but really, phonological awareness and phonics aren't often taught in isolation, but phonics and word recognition are K through 5, and again, like all of your great rhyming books and being able to, how do the sounds that we hear, how do you read those on paper for phonics is the big thing for phonics. And fluency just means we want kids to be able to read fluently, smoothly, and understanding what they read. The second ones, reading informational text and reading literature. The same 4 standards are there for reading informational text and for reading literature. Today I'm grouping them together just for the sake of time. These are taught K through 12, and the informational text has been a big push. Finding text that kids can read at their level has been a challenge we've been really stepping up to in my library in Michigan. So key ideas and details for both informational text and literature basically means new kids get the big picture of what they're reading. Do they understand it? Do they get the key points and do they get the supporting facts? Craft and structure. Now, I'm a librarian and I work with everyone in ages birth through age 12. And craft and structure looks to me very much like a great standard that really hits the middle school and high school kids when you're talking about authors' craft and structure, breaking apart what they're reading to figure out why did the author write it the way they did. It's also for informational text, the structure, all those informational text features, that falls under this literature, craft, and structure. We can talk about things like form, like prose, poetry. Sometimes when an author chooses to write a graphic novel format rather than a standard novel. And also books with great vocabulary. Why did the author choose these words specifically? So any of your books that have rich, wonderful vocabulary will be perfect for helping to teach that standard. Integration of knowledge and ideas. I wish I could put shiny, sparkly stars around this one because this one seems to be the big push for our schools where we librarians can step in and rise to the challenge and say, we can help you teach this. Because the idea, integration of knowledge and ideas, is about using more than one source of information to complete the big picture. So, this can mean using more than one book per topic. This can also mean using books where the text and the pictures tell a slightly different story. When you think of Officer Buckle and Gloria by Peggy Rathman, the pictures and the text, they are slightly different. The versions of the story that they tell are slightly different, and together they come up with the whole big picture. So when reading picture books to kiddos where the text and pictures are slightly different than each other, Dear Mrs. LaRue, those kind of things. That's great for integration of knowledge and ideas and getting kids to recognize that they're getting information from more than one source. And of course, it's a great reason for us to have our collections be broad, but also deep. We need more than one book per topic. Kids need to use more than one source for information in order to get a bigger, fuller picture. And finally, range of reading. Yes, we want kids reading broadly. We want them reading chapter books and informational books, but magazine articles and cookbooks and op-ed pieces. This is also a really good way for us to justify using databases and all different sorts of resources when we're working in our library classrooms. If you see the codes written out, sometimes they'll be in some of the teacher guides that I see, it'll show like that ccss.ela.literacy. And I don't know any teachers who come to me saying, Kristen, do you have any books that can really help me with RI 0.2.5? No one has the standards memorized like this, but sometimes you'll see these standards in things like teacher guides or in catalogs. RI tells you if it's reading information, or RL for fiction, or RL for literature. Then the first number is the grade level, and the second number is which standard they're talking about. And I chose this one specifically to show it's very much to our benefit as librarians to know what these standards are, because then if we need to make presentations to school boards or if we're going for bond issues, knowing the standards and showing how we directly as librarians help teach and support teaching of these standards greatly increases our educational value in the eyes of the public. These are the Common Core state standards for writing. I'm not going to go in depth on these, but I wanted you to at least kind of know what they are. What really surprised me, well, what's new for me is seeing under text types and purposes. We want kids to be writing W3, narrative. Well, we've always had kids, you know, what would you do if you had a unicorn? And for W2, we have them do state reports or reports on an animal. So they've been writing information and they've been writing narrative for a long time. But W1, that's huge on writing argument opinion pieces. And especially at the lower levels, finding mentor texts that can show how to write an argument or opinion piece can be challenging. And that's another great reason to say it's important that we have all kinds of resources justifying our databases or paper magazines. Having time for kids in print for classrooms or at least in your library can help show that this helps support that writing standard of argument opinion. And I really liked too, you see you can put a little star by it, down onto one of the core standards for writing is research to build and present knowledge, and that's totally a librarian can teach this standard. They need librarians at schools in order to help teach this standard. And public librarians, when kids are coming in, we are the key source outside of school to help them hit this standard. So public at large to know the core standards that have been adopted by our states that all our kids are being tested on, librarians are key teachers of these standards. Okay, these I'm not even going to touch on, I just wanted you to know that they're there. There are core standards for speaking and listening, and there are core standards for language, and that's where they start talking about the vowel, consonant, vowel, periods, things like that. So if you've got parents say, you know, well, what grade do they teach paragraphs, or what grade do they teach quotation marks? You can always direct them to the core standards and help them look up the language standard that's specific to their grade. Phew. Now, 44 states said yes, which means that 6 are not on board with Common Core. But take a look at the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. The ones for language arts look kind of a lot like the core standards ones. So if you have people coming from other places, or if you ever kind of wonder, well, if 44 states are doing this, what about the other 6? They're doing almost exactly the same things, or things very similar. They just don't like calling them core standards. So the big differences between what we did before and what we're doing now with core standards, the ones that I have noticed as a librarian is there's a huge emphasis on informational text, especially at the lower levels. So when it comes to collection development, yes, we've got to beef up our nonfiction, especially our early reader nonfiction. The reading specialists I've spoken to almost all say that almost all their kids read at a higher level in fiction than they do in nonfiction. So when I'm pulling books to use in a 5th grade classroom and they're going to be nonfiction, I consider throwing in quite a few that have more of a 3rd grade, 4th grade reading level to make sure that the kids who are using these books are able to read them. Another thing to think about when it comes to core standards and collective development, we need more than one text per subject. And if you ever need to justify your budget and why you're spending money on what you're spending it on, we need to, if anyone asks, well, why do you have 2 books on George Washington? Because we need to be able to compare and contrast. So it is a reason why we might have to add more money to our budgets for our collection development. And the last one, looking for mentor texts that focus on the opinion argument has been quite a challenge. And I'm finding some really good ones, and I am totally going to put in the shameless self-plug, but Groundhog's Dilemma, written by me, illustrated by my husband, comes out December 1st, and half of the animals want the groundhog to make spring come early, and the other half of the animals want a longer winter. And all the characters then are trying to convince Groundhog why he should see or not see his shadow. And Groundhog is a pleaser, is an animal pleaser, and says yes to everyone. And then on the big day for Groundhog's Day, then he's in hot water. That's his big dilemma. What is he going to do? So if you're looking for a picture book for the early grades that works on opinion argument writing, or is a good source for that, consider Groundhog's Dilemma. Okay, text complexity. This, I think, should be like a poster in every single school library and public library, because when we talk about kids reading at their level, we as librarians know that there's more than just the number on the spine of the book to consider for the text's complexity for an individual reader. I have parents come in all the time to my library saying, my kid reads at a level J, or a 6.2, or a 44, or whatever their school system has for their leveled books. And we don't do that in our public library, sort the books by levels, but also readability. If we just go by the red quantitative part, the readability score, they get those scores when the publishers they count the number of words per page, they count the number of pages, they count the number of syllables per page, and they squish that all together and they spit out a number for the book. So, but to say that a book is a 3.6 does not necessarily mean that it's perfect for a certain reader, because you also have to consider the yellow qualitative part. What is the book about? My daughter is a voracious reader, and when she was assigned, the first time she was assigned The Old Man and the Sea for Honors 9 English is the first time Hemingway writes very simply, so the quantitative score for The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway is lower than Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. And my daughter can read Twilight and has, and read it very easily, because qualitatively Hemingway's ideas are much higher level than Stephanie Meyer's. So the text, even though the score on the side of the book says it's easier, qualitatively that's a lot of theme and heaviness to process. Also, we have to my daughter does not fish. And so when she was trying to figure out what the theme of the book was, she's like, I don't know, it's an old man and a fish and he's in a boat. Kids who have more experience, perhaps, with fishing will come to this book with a different level of understanding. Those kids will find Old Man and the Sea easier to read than someone like my daughter. Also, you have to consider the task for which we're reading. Is a kid going to be skimming through a book, or is the kid going to be reading the book and test it on his knowledge? That will determine how complex the text is that you can give a kid. So when kids come into your library and you give them a book, if anyone ever asks you, why are you giving a certain book to a certain child, pull out this triangle and say, because as a librarian, as an expert when it comes to books, I know that the quantitative score on this book, along with the qualitative part, what this book is about, and the prior knowledge you need to have to really understand this book, really works for this reader for this kind of task. And that's why this book is the right book, no matter what the number on the spine says. All right, I'm going to step away from the soapbox about scores on spines and readability levels, and we're going to move on. Oh, if you want a copy of this, by the way, feel free to email me and I can send it to you. And please, let's keep in mind things like multiple intelligences. I have the copy of this chart in the front of my lesson plan book to remind me to use all different types of activities when I'm planning storytime classes or lessons when I go into school classrooms. When I plan a lesson, I have to keep in mind some kids are very body smart, and to make them sit for 20 or 30 minutes is to really challenge the way that they learn best. So I try for my lessons to incorporate things where there are movement activities and there is some music and there's the logical structure organization. Even with my baby time stories now, I put up a little agenda of what we're doing for story time, mostly to show the parents that there's some kids who, in the future their babies may understand like lists are really important, but especially for those kids who are on the autistic spectrum, for whom transitions are challenging. When I always have a lesson plan, I always have a list of things I know I'm going to do in my lesson. If I can share that somehow with a checklist that I post or up on a bulletin board or the chalkboard or a dry erase board, if I can say, these are the things that are going to happen when I'm talking to you, during our time together, and then I can check things off or erase them as we go, those kids who have difficulty with transition will be much more successful during my lesson time. And again, if you want a copy of this chart, feel free to email me at the end of the session. Now, I want to go through each of the standards in reading, put them into easy to understand terms, and then show some really great examples of what books you can use to teach that skill and some activities to go along. So you read the book and then you do an activity that helps to teach this standard. So here's print concepts. Again, it's just for kindergartners and first graders, and you can see again, it's basically how does print work. This means that really any book in your library you can use to teach print concepts, as long as you're pointing out how the print works. So for all those catalogs that say lately, our books support Common Core standards, go ahead and buy our books. Every book works for print concepts, but these I found especially helpful. Things like Creature ABC by Andrew Zuckerman. Your ABC books, your alphabet books, are perfect for print concepts. I happen to like this one especially though because it's the capital letter, the lowercase letter, the name of the animal, and incredible photographs of these animals. Like that's a photograph of the elephant, and going through this book is gorgeous when it comes to the photos of the animals. One of those multiple intelligences, by the way, was Nature Smart. And kids who are nature smart learn best when they're talking about the natural world. Going out, those are the kids who just ache to go outside. Well, Illinois is a lot like Michigan in that 6 months of the year going outside is not always an option. And you know those kids who in February and March are just wilting, just falling over because they have not had enough outside time. Using books with animals and plants and nature themes and food can really help those kids perk up and process more easily than they would on other topics. So Creature ABC. So you read a book like this with your kiddos, and then you can make a Creature ABC book where the kiddos use their bodies and show you what the letter shape looks like. I wanted to do a Creature ABC group. The first time I did this lesson, we did all the shapes of the letters with our bodies, and then I said, let's go and find, we'll cut out different creatures from magazines, because I had a bunch of old magazines. Let's cut out, we'll cut out pictures of animals and make our own Creature ABC. It is really hard to find a magazine photo of a quail. There were so many animals book, and I can do this with my storytime kids too, for the ones who just come to our story times in our public library. A classroom book of Creature ABC where the kids are the creatures, but they're making the shape of the letter with their body. So you can say, Mrs. Wellman's ABC class. And I really like this one too because I remember back in the day when we had Polaroid cameras. That's how old I am. When if you wanted to take a picture of something, you had to wait to get the film developed or do the Polaroids that are expensive. Now with digital cameras, I make tons and tons of classroom books where I take pictures of the kids and then use them in books because kids love seeing pictures of themselves. For kids who are in the middle and upper grades, if you pull out a book like I Read Signs by Tana Hoban, again, and this is probably one that you have on your shelves because it's a classic, you'll go through these signs and a lot of them, because this book is older, are not the ones that the kids are used to. So it's actually kind of interesting to see the decoding that goes on, trying to figure out, wow, take a look at that sign and where was that before? But again, after you've gone through this for print concepts and talking about environmental print, this is another perfect opportunity to have the kids go through your library and look for signs together and take pictures of them. Now again, the first time I did this lesson, I had my kiddos come through the library with me and I said, I bet there are a bunch of signs in our library. Let's take pictures and talk about what they mean. Because my kids see these signs all the time, but a lot of them don't know what J fiction refers to. So the first time I did this and made a fun book, I just had pictures of the signs and where they were located. My kids from this story time, from this reading group that I have for after school, didn't use the book as much as I thought I would, as much as I had hoped they would. And then I realized it works so much better when you have pictures of the kids in the book. They love to see themselves, and they will remember so much more what that sign means when they can relate the kid who was standing there and what we were talking about. So if you're going to do any, if you're going to make any books with kiddos, try to make sure that you have the pictures of the kids in them. So this is phonological awareness, and again, just kindergarten, first grade. Now this is, if you look at what the standard is, yes, every book practically in your library can be used to teach phonological awareness. But if you talk about the ones like the rhyming ones, or the ones that have alliteration, are excellent for this skill. And here are some of my favorites. Rhyming Dust Bunnies by Jan Thomas. Love, love, love her. And she also has Here Comes the Big Mean Dust Bunny. That's the sequel to this. Well, in this book, Ed, Ned, Ted, and Bob are rhyming dust bunnies. And they love to play the rhyming game. So one will say, let's play the rhyming game. Far. And the next one says, jar. And the next one says, car. And then Bob says, look. No, Bob. Does not rhyme with far, car, and jar. Let's play it again. Store, more. That doesn't rhyme. The other rhyming dust bunnies think that Bob is not getting the idea, when actually Bob is trying to tell them, look out, the vacuum cleaner is coming. And we're dust bunnies. So the dust bunnies get sucked up into the vacuum cleaner, and then they have to figure. But one more thing to think about with Jan Thomas too, her illustrations, take a look at those clean lines, and they're so easily visible if you have a large group or if you have kids with vision issues. Jan Thomas books are really, really good for those two groups, or like for big groups the kids can see the pictures, and kids with vision issues, if they're having troubles with other books, Jan Thomas is excellent for them to read. So you take a book like The Rhyming Dust Bunnies and you can make it into an interactive bulletin board for your library. Now with my little ones, I might color code these, the index cards that you see at the top that I wrote, so that book, took, and cook, as well as other index cards that have in there, might all be the same color. And then, of course, you put in goofy ones, zebra and elephant, to be able to stick over Bob. If you have slightly older kids that you want to challenge, you might throw in words that rhyme but don't look the same at the end, that don't have the same endings, like there and hair. So that would be a little bit more of a challenge for the kids to figure out the rhyming words. This is also a super fun game to play with the kids, where for those kids especially who are struggling with the whole rhyming thing, if you've got kids who are a little bit behind on the reading skills, you can play the Rhyming Dust Bunnies games and work those kids into the game in a way where they're definitely going to be successful. So I played this game where I have those little characters that I got off of Jan Thomas's website, and I'll say, let's play Rhyming Dust Bunnies, and I call up kids. Julia is going to be Ed, and Joe's going to be Ned, and Matt's going to be is going to be Bob. You can put the kids who have trouble with rhyming as Bob, and the whole point of the game is that Bob is going to say something silly. So if I say, let's play the rhyming game, the first three kids can give me a word that rhymes with near, but when it comes to Bob's turn, it's Bob's job to say something like hippopotamus, which everyone laughs and thinks he's really funny. So if you've got a kiddo who is struggling, that's a great way to have them hear the rhyming words over and over again, but not be not be put on the spot to try to come up with a rhyming word. Flip, Flop, Bop by Matt Novak is fantastic for beginning sounds and ending sounds. That the difference is, this is great to read in the springtime because Matt Novak has all these cute kiddos who winter is gone and they're pulling on their shoes and their socks and their boots and putting on their flip-flop to do the flip-flop-bop. Now, I've done this with toddlers as well as with older kids just for the fun of saying flip, flop, bop for the love of language. And of course, the next thing I knew, all the little shoes and socks were coming off and all the little bare piggy toes are out. And I was like, oh, okay, we're all pulling them off. All right. So what I did then with that little group, and I've done it since with like the preschool age or the kindergarten age, the early ones, if you've got developmental kindergarten, then you have them trace their feet. And you cut out the little feet shapes. So they've made their own little flip-flops and they get to decorate them. And then we can sort those by color. Here, all the red ones are in this pile and all the blue ones are in this pile, and it doesn't have to matter if they match. For the older kids, you can have them trace their feet for flip-flops and write some of the words from the book. Flip, flop, bop, hop, and then you can sort each of the little flip-flops that they've made here by beginning sounds, by ending sounds, so you can take this higher or lower depending on your kids. Phonics and word recognition is kindergarten through 5th grade. And as you can see here, for each level you'll go, if you want to have a really great time tonight, you can look these up around, on your own free time with a glass of wine and go through for each level, for each grade level, what they have to learn for each one, for prefixes and suffixes and things like that. But in general, all these phonics and word recognition things, again, you can use any book to teach these. But here's some of my favorites to show how you're going to specifically hone in on word recognition and on the phonics part. Ain't Gonna Paint No More. This one's by Karen Beaumont and David Catrow, and it just delights me. It's to the tune of It Ain't Gonna Rain No More. This is a rhyming book, though, and I love for this book how the rhyme is supported with a page turn. So here's a little kid who's been told he's not supposed to paint anymore, and the paints are put away, but there ain't no way that he ain't gonna paint no more. So he gets the paint. And so he takes some red, he says, so I take some red and I paint my, and then with the page turn, head. Now I ain't gonna paint no more. Oh, what the heck, gonna paint my, turn the page, and all the kids are calling out, hopefully, neck. So the guessing of the rhyme is supported with that page turn, which I love, and the art is just outstanding. So with this one, with ain't gonna paint, those big rolls of paper, have the kids take turns tracing each other's body on the big roll of paper and then painting their bodies on that big paper. Or you can give them a smaller sheet and have them paint and decorate the bodies. But I want to give you a caution that I learned kind of the hard way. I gave for a storytime class that I had after school. I read the book and I wanted to work on listening comprehension. So I gave them each a little body shape on paper and I said, let's go through the book now and we'll paint the bodies kind of like the kid painted himself in the book. Now take some red and paint your head. So I wanted to use it as a listening comprehension until I had afterwards one of my teacher friends who's a guy say, to be careful using color when you're trying to check for comprehension because up to 1/4, up to 25% of our boys are colorblind. And Gary himself is colorblind and talks about how when he sees the crayons, he wouldn't be able to pick out a red one to paint the head. So even though he heard and understood the direction, because he's colorblind and he can't see the difference, especially red-green is a really tough one and very common for a lot of boys. For girls, it's much less common, but still red-green is the tough one. He said, I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference, and so I could, put green all over the head and you'd think I didn't understand. So if you're doing any cool projects with kiddos, just try to keep color as something fantastic but not part of your evaluation piece. Drummer Boy of John John. Now this is a biography And I'm working really hard to incorporate a lot more informational reading into all of my story times, even with the little ones. The expectation is that by fourth grade, our students are reading informational books like 40% of the time. And if they read information at a lower level than they do fiction, we've got kids who, there's a gap there. So one of the best ways to close that gap in reading information is to just immerse them in tons and tons of great informational reading. Because the more that they read it, the more they're familiar with the structure of it and the way that informational text works, the better they'll be able to approach it on the page themselves. So this is a biography picture book about this little boy who is growing up, and it's Mardi Gras time. And he wants to be part of the celebration, and he wants to make music. And he lives in the islands, and so he wants to be part of the music-making parade, but he's poor and he doesn't have any money. The garbage dump with his friends, and he finds an old beat-up steel drum, and he likes the sounds that it makes when he hits the steel drum. Well, this is the biography of Winston, who is the father of the steel drum band movement. Like, he's the first one to make a steel drum. And this book is full of onomatopoeia. So you can have, you can make recycled instruments, make instruments out of recycled materials with your kiddos. Then talk about when you shake the cup that has the beans in it, you can talk about the shuk, shuk, shuk that you hear and say, if we were going to write a book about like, the drummer boy of John John, if we were going to write a word and to look at the words on the page that Mark Greenwood used, how did he spell, like how did he put into words with letters the sounds that we hear? So it's a really great lesson on phonics and word recognition. And finally, fluency. Again, kindergarten through fifth grade, we want our students to be able to read smoothly and with understanding. Now, again, you're seeing words like read on level text. And who determines what on level is? And again, we as librarians, we have so much, it's so important for us to give kids the right book for them and not just go by the numbers on the spines. So I really hope you can use that triangle at some point to let teachers and parents know that when you give kids books, when you do the reader's advisory, you have to consider all the pieces to make sure your kids are getting the right books for them. But for kids who we want them to be able to read fluently, here are a couple of great books you can use. Dogs Don't Brush Their Teeth. This one's by Diane DeGroat and Shelley Rotner. I found this book for my friend who teaches kindergarten to English as a second language students. And her students don't necessarily even speak fluently when they're coming into her. So to get them to read fluently is a huge challenge. But there are only 3 words in this book: dogs, do, and don't. So with every page, you'll see a dog, and for me it's a little creepy because some of the dogs are photoshopped to do things they can't normally do. So, but it says things like dogs do, and there's a picture of a dog howling at the moon. And then you fold out that page and it says dogs don't, and there are dogs photoshopped to be playing instruments in a band. So, and that's the whole book. And of course there's one of, dogs do, and you see the dog tinkling on a fire hydrant. And then dogs don't, and then you see the dog sitting on a toilet. So it's, but it's not graphic or gross. It's just the stuff that kids love, of course. And again, only those 3 words, dogs do and don't. So all my little kindergartners were successful at reading this book smoothly and fluently because the pictures gave them a huge cue as for if it's do or don't. So with my little group of after-school readers, one thing I do is I make a chart, and I am not crafty. So this is Kristen's version of crafty. I put out a whole bunch of extra die cuts and said, show me what dogs do and show me what dogs don't. So Ruby is showing us that dogs do chase rabbits and they don't play baseball. So Ruby got it. She was able to successfully, for her at this level, that was writing for her. She was able to read and to write and respond on paper because she knew what dogs do and what dogs don't. But I also want to make sure that all my body smart kids, the ones who have to move around, are also really successful. So with the same group, we made dog masks, and then they could show me with their bodies. So for the kids who were less successful with the chart, or having one of those days where doing the chart stuff and the paper stuff was going to be too much, they were definitely going to be successful with showing me with their bodies what a dog can do and what a dog can't do. Nursery rhyme comics is a really cool option to give to older kids who need practice reading but don't want to be given baby books. So I think this one I found is really cool for those kids who love art, especially because each of these comics is done by a different cartoonist or illustrators, and the pictures are fantastic. If you've got students who are familiar with nursery rhymes, reading this book will be fairly simple. If they already know the words for Humpty Dumpty, if they already know the rhymes, seeing them on the page they'll be supported because they'll already know what the words are supposed to say. But it's not a baby book because you can talk about, look at these cool different illustrators and how they chose to do different things and their different styles. And for kids who like to draw, you can have them then illustrate a nursery rhyme of their own. So consider this one if you want fluency for kids who will they be supported because they already know what the words are going to say. Key ideas and details. Now again, this is for informational reading as well as for reading literature, and it's for kindergarten through 5th grade. And you can see this is all stuff we've always done, talking about beginning, middle, and end, or talking about what are the main topics. So again, just about everything you've got in your library can be used to teach this, but it's just what you choose to focus on. And here's some of my favorites to teach key ideas and details. Are You a Horse by Andy Rash. This is a fantastic book, and there's actually a ton of information here. This is a book that's really about deductive reasoning, because that cowboy's name is Roy, and Roy is given a saddle for a birthday present. And it comes with instructions. Number 1, find a horse. Number 2, enjoy the ride. Well, Roy's not sure what a horse is, so he goes out looking for one. And he goes up to all these different characters asking, are you a horse? And the cactus is like, no, I'm not a horse. A horse is an animal. So then Roy goes and finds an animal. Are you a horse? And the snake says, no, I'm not a horse because a horse has legs. So then Roy goes to find an animal with legs. And he's narrowing and narrowing with each piece of information. With each character he asks, he gets new information, and he narrows his search until he finds a zebra. No, I'm not a horse. Horses don't have stripes. Roy is so distraught. Will I ever find a horse? And then he sees an animal that meets all of the criteria from all the different animals that he's already met. Are you a horse? He asks. Of course, says the horse. Want to go for a ride? Says Roy. And on the last page you see, and so they did, and Roy is wearing the saddle and the horse is riding him. So cute. But there's a ton of information going on in this book. So what I did, what you can do after reading this book to help them process, for those logic kids, to help them process all that information, kids who have trouble getting all the information from paragraphs into logical spots in their brains, we made a chart like this. I gave the kids each characters from the book that we had just read, and I sorted them into groups so that there was more than one kid for each character. And then I could ask the kids for that character these questions. Cactus, are you an animal? And there's more than one kid who's a cactus, so there's more than one kid no one feels put on the spot. And you fill in this chart, yes or no, and it's fantastic. Although I must say, the first time I did this, I hadn't prepared myself. I went down to things like crab and chameleon. Do you lay eggs? And the kids looked at me and they said, I don't know, and I didn't know either. But we put a question mark there and said, we will have to go find this information in another resource when we're done with the lesson because that information was not in this book. And as soon as we were done with the chart and the book, there were kids who were like, let's go find the encyclopedia and to find out how to fill in the chart. So teachable moment for students and for the teacher, but it all worked out. Pop, the invention of bubblegum, is a narrative nonfiction, which has been a big buzzing topic in Michigan right now. So this is a story that has a beginning, middle, and end, like a fiction book, but it's all informational. How was bubblegum invented? This one is so much fun to, you can do a pretty basic, recalling the events in this book with great big pink circles, have the kids help you write what happened first, what happened in the middle, what happened next. For younger ones, you just do first, middle, last. For older ones, you have them include more events from the story. But I loved this. This book was so much fun that we did a whole Science of Bubblegum project, and we hypothesized, will bubblegum weigh more or less after you chew it? We went through the scientific process and tested this. We also made our own bubblegum. So fun. There's a company called Glee Gum, and it's crazy sticky, but it was really, really fun to actually make our own gum after reading this book. Okay, craft and structure. Now again, this is kindergarten through 12th grade, so things like point of view or regular beats and alliteration, it's all about really the structure of the story, as well as all those great text features that librarians can teach. But it's also the words and phrases, like why they were chosen, because they supply rhythm and meaning. Poetry is perfect for this, and songs are too. And here's a beautiful book that has vocabulary that you can discuss with kids. If you tell them, we're going to sing America the Beautiful, many of them can sing for you, and that they know the lines about, oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain. But if you actually ask them what a fruited plain is, many of them don't have a good visual image. They don't know what they don't know what the words of that song, of that famous poem, what they mean. So this book by Wendell Miner is gorgeous. But if you do Illinois state reports, or if you do multiple state reports, depending on the age of your kids, you can read this book, learn what those different what the fruited plains look like, and so there's all these great images so the kids will understand the words, the vocabulary being used. But at the back of the book, there is a map of the United States, and Wendell Miner points out where he took each image from. You can use that for state reports and talk about what your state looks like or different states. Gorgeous, gorgeous. I'm getting a little behind myself, so I'm going to speed up. Battle Bunny, again, for Author's Craft. Fantastic. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but in this one, it's as if this little boy, Alex, has been given this birthday bunny book by his grandmother, and he just thinks it's so icky sweet, so he changes it, and all the drawings that you see like scribbled over in pencil to making it Battle Bunny, it's Doomsday, are supposedly Alex making the book the way he wants it to be. Well, you can go to birthdaybunny.com and print off for kids the supposedly original Birthday Bunny story for them to then change the way that Alex did in this story. But it's all about author's choice of words. Change some of the words, totally change the meaning and the tone of the story. Integration of knowledge and ideas. Again, I wish there were sparkly stars around this. We do this every time we share different versions of The Gingerbread Boy, or whenever we do an author study. But specifically, we want kids to whenever they're to take information from more than one source. Huge for informational text and having more than one book for the kids to use for their resources when they're doing things like animal reports or state reports. But yeah, even like when it comes to images in the text. How to gain information from the diagrams and the charts as well as from the text written out. I like to compare for the little ones, Old MacDonald Had a Farm and Young MacDonald. So with Young MacDonald, he does a bit of genetic modifying. He puts two animals into his scientific machine, and when they go in and then they're rearranged into a new animal, like a cow and a horse would go in, and they'd come out a how or a course. And rather than saying with a moo moo here and a moo moo there, now they either say moo neigh or neigh moo, depending on which got the front end and which got the back end. And don't worry, he puts them all back at the end, so no one's horrified and scarred for life. But this was really wonderful then to make a matching game that worked at so many different levels. And this is just using, clip art that I found that was copyright free. So littlest ones can rearrange these cards on an interactive bulletin board or in a small center. They can rearrange just to make the animals match the way that they would genetically. You can also arrange them then to make the crazy animals and see if they can tell you what a shig, if they can't say, if they're not, some of the kids can work on reading shig and peep, but you can also say, this is a shig. What does this animal say? It says ba oink, but a peep says oink ba, because we have beginning sound and ending sound going from left to right. So that's a good, for those kids working on, that's a good reading skill, the hearing the beginning and the ending sounds and focusing on that. And for the older ones, a taste of colored water. Oh, for Martin Luther King Day, if you have been reading the same biographies and you want to have a different way to get the message across, A Taste of Colored Water, fantastic book, written and illustrated by my husband, Matt Faulkner, so of course I included it. But it is a great book all about these kids who are living in the South in the 60s, and they go into town because they've heard about colored water, and they imagine what that must taste like. And they find out later on what the reality of colored water is. But you compare that to white water, which is like the same story, but from the different kid's point of view. So here's a little African-American boy who dreams of tasting white water because he assumes it must be so much better than what he gets from the colored water fountain, because things for whites are always better than what he gets as a colored boy. So really cool to then compare and contrast the two different points of view. And I love using picture books on important topics with older kids. Picture books are not just for little sweet peas. All right, I know we're getting near the end. Range of reading. We want kids to read broadly as well as deeply, so we want them to read all kinds of stuff. Yay, librarians, because we've got a bunch of stuff. For the little ones, reading a book about math like 1 + 1 = 5, super fun, because 1 + 1 = 5, you hold that up and your kids say, no, it's not. Well, turn the page. 1 set of twins plus 1 set of triplets equals 5 babies. So here's a really fun math book that you can find to show, for teachers to work in if they're working on addition, and then it's a great writing prompt because you can have kids work on their own unlikely additions, 1 + 1 = whatever, and there are picture clues that they use to kind of give an idea of what the two groups are going to be to equal that unexpected number. And then Balloons Over Broadway. For Thanksgiving this year, this one's going to be perfect because when we talk about the parades and watching the parades at Thanksgiving time and those great big balloons, how did they come to be? This book is a biography about Tony Sarg, who was a marionettist back in the day, and it's so cool to realize that those great big float balloons came from the idea of a man who thought about his marionettes and what if he filled them with helium and turned them upside down. And that's how we got the Balloons Over Broadway. This has a really great online teaching kit that goes with it, balloonsoverbroadway.com. And it's really cool then for STEM stuff and for STEAM stuff because you can have kids kind of engineer how to make their own marionettes. Oh, and if you're trying to tech it up, or if you want to justify why you have certain resources, Scholastic Book Flicks is perfect for integrating knowledge and ideas because right there it pairs a fiction and nonfiction text. So if you are looking into, if you need to budget out money for Scholastic Book Flicks, or if you want to use Scholastic Book Flicks in your library during class time, you can use it because it absolutely supports that core standard. And if you're just aching for more information on core standards, there's the website for you. And you can visit my website too. Every month I do a little mini version of this webinar. And if you have any questions, you can always go to KristenRemenar.com and you can email me right from there if you need any information or if you want any of those images I showed you.
All right, thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate it. It was a really interesting, and there's some really great books that you shared there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and we did not have any questions come in during the program, so you must have addressed everything um, there. But you've put your website up, so if anyone has any questions later, they can reach out to you. And
Yep.
so thank you so much for your time, and thank you again for letting us record your session today. We will get that posted on the Rails website within about a week or so. So thank you so much, Kristen.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, and thank you all, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.